In this video, we're going to walk you through the installation of Rocky Road Outfitters steel bumper guard, optional brush guard, and Warren's 8,000-pound VR8S winch that is going to be installed on this 2016 Jeep Cherokee Trailhawk KL. Put the front of your vehicle on jack stands and remove the front tires. I do recommend securing the vehicle with approved wedges before lifting the vehicle. Once the vehicle is lifted and jack stands are in place, remove the front tires. With a 10mm wrench, remove the ground from the battery. On the bottom corners of the vehicle, locate two pockets. I use the 7/32 drill bit to only take off the head of the rivet. Be careful not to drill all the way through because there are components that will be damaged. On the inside, lower of the fender well, locate two bolts that need to be removed. With an 8mm or a 5/16, remove those bolts from the lower corner of the fender well. I found it easier to remove all three of the bolts in the fender well to get the fender well liner out of the way. Use a piece of baling wire to secure it out of your way while you work. On the inside of the fender well, locate the white push pins that hold the fender flare on. With a flat nose screwdriver, depress the top of the push pins and use another screwdriver to push them out. There are 10 of these push pins on each side. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Once the push pins have been removed, the fender flare can then easily be taken off of the vehicle. On the front of your vehicle, locate the black plastic push pins that hold the plastic shield that covers your radiator mount. Locate the rivets on the inside of the shield. There's a divot on the inside portion of the rivet. Pry it out carefully with your screwdriver because these items need to be removed. Pull the inner section out and then the rest of it comes out pretty easily. There are 12 of these rivets. There are 12 of these rivets that need to be removed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Once the push pin and plastic base has been removed, carefully remove the radiator shield. With a 10mm socket, remove 4 bolts that secure the fender to the support. The next two are pretty hard to locate. And the other is fairly deep. On the inside of the fender well, locate the bolt holding the upper bumper to the lower bumper fascia. Remove it with a 7mm socket from both sides of the vehicle. Using a 10mm socket, remove the 4 bolts that hold the lower fascia to the bumper support. If your Jeep is equipped with a skid plate, use a 13mm socket to loosen the bolts that secure it to the frame. This will allow you to loosen the fascia from the bottom. Look on the inside of the fender well. You'll notice the fascia and the bumper are held together with clips. Being very careful from the outside. Get a flathead screwdriver and work it into that clip and push it down and gently pop that fascia out. You're going to have to work your way along the bumper very carefully not to scratch the paint. It's fairly tricky, kind of a touchy little deal. Work your way all along the inside. Now once you get these out, you'll have to go to the other side. From the outside of the bumper, carefully press the flat, wide screwdriver between the bumper and fascia while pulling slightly on the bumper until it pops out. Do this along the center section, but prying the tabs from the inside by the radiator when you get to the front. The trick I found that works best is prying downward on the bumper and away from the fascia. Just prying downward on the bumper and giving a little pressure out. Lets that pop away pretty easily. Once the tabs have been loosened, the bumper is just going to be hanging there. The instructions suggested that the hood bumpers might need to be removed. If you have to do that, make sure you know where they've been adjusted to, or you might have a bit of a rattle. So note that carefully. On this particular model, we were able to slip it right over the top, and there it comes loose. Once that has been done, you're going to notice that the wires are being held in place. They're keeping the bumper from moving away completely. Inside the fender well, on the driver's side, locate the connector harness for the fog lights. Disconnect this and any other similar connectors you may have on the bumper. I found that you've got a little bit of a connector here that you have to pry out very carefully so that you don't ruin it. If you do, you can find one at your local automotive parts store. Using the 16mm socket, remove the 2 bolts holding the tow hooks in place. The tow hook itself won't come out completely, and it won't need to. If your vehicle is not equipped with the tow hooks, you will have to purchase the kit. You can locate that kit on the Rocky Road Outfitters website. Please be advised, the tow hook accessory is essential for this installation. Without it, you can't go forward. So hopefully, you've figured this out and already purchased the kit if your vehicle. We're currently viewing the bumper crossmember from the driver's side of the vehicle. You'll have to remove the 4 bolts and 2 nuts that are located there. Using a 15mm socket to remove the bolts and a 10mm socket to remove the nut. In the process of trying to remove the bumper crossmember and accessing the bolts, we found it was necessary to use a 10mm socket and remove the bolt that was securing the hood bumper to the vehicle. That allowed us access to the last bolt that holds the bumper crossmember. Be careful not to damage the transmission lines when removing the bumper crossmember. I've left 1 bolt on each side and employed an assistant to help me hold the crossmember while I take out the last 2 bolts. Now carefully remove the bumper crossmember. Being very careful not to damage any lines. Here comes the fun part. It's time to start reassembling the parts provided by Rocky Road Outfitters. We're preparing to reinstall the crossmember winch mount. For 6-cylinder owners, be very careful of the transmission lines on the right side of the vehicle. They need to fit inside of the cutout pocket on the crossmember. These are the small locating bolts. They're going to help you align the crossmember as you reinstall it. The holes for the small locating bolts are oddly shaped, which is to help with the fitment, since you'll likely have to push, pull, kick, and knock the mount into place to get it During the process of reinstalling the new bumper crossmember winch mount, we noticed that this plastic fairing was kind of in the way, and the cutout that was originally for the original portion of the crossmember wasn't quite where it needed to be. What we found after careful measurement was just after this angle comes up and this indentation meets, if we cut this out, and we only needed to cut about 1 inch out using a fine tool, we were able to slip it in. Using the fine tool, we cut across here so we had a nice, easy, clean cut. Factory bolts and small nut to reattach the new crossmember and mount to your Jeep. Remember, the small nut is a 10mm, and I used a long extension to get into this pretty tight space. The rest of the bolts are a 15mm. For the lower bolts, it was necessary to use a wobble socket to get to them. They were pretty tough to get in, but once we got them started, we were able to tighten them right up. Remember, of your hook mounts, they have the capability of flipping upside down. We had to move this thing around and jiggle it a bit loosen the bolts back up in order to get them back in place. Make sure and take note that your AC lines and transmission lines aren't rubbing up against the metal. If they are, I would suggest using something to use as a buffer, maybe a piece of hose or a piece of foam that you can wrap around and maybe zip tie. In this particular case, we just had just a little bit, and I think we're fine. Your new bumper crossmember, supplied by Rocky Road Outfitters, is your winch mount. For 6-cylinder Jeep owners, you're going to have to remove the horns in order to get your winch slid in. With a 10mm socket, loosen the bolt at the top. Slide it right out. The Jeep Trailhawk doesn't have a lot of room up front for a winch to be installed. Rocky Road Outfitters has provided us with the Warren VR8S, being that it's very low profile in order to fit into this. At this point, we've deviated a bit from the instructions provided by Rocky Road Outfitters, as models of winches has changed and evolved. We've gone to the Warren instructions and looked a bit ahead because we knew we were going to have to remove the control box, and it won't quite fit into the bumper at this time. So we've used an Allen wrench to remove the front 2 bolts. At that point, we're able to rock this back, and with the Torx, we're now removing the control module from the top of the winch. And once all of the mounting screws have been removed from the control module, the Allen bolts are now reinstalled back into the winch in order to secure everything and make it tight. For ease of installation, we've decided to carefully mark all of our wires, and we're going to take them off in order to have a little bit better chance of getting this into the mount without hitting the radiator. As suggested by Rocky Road Outfitters, we're going to use a little bit of tape to secure the square nuts inside the legs of the winch. Alright, we've tried to mount the winch once already, but we found that it's pretty tight in a couple of areas. We found that it's touching the coolant lines, and it's also rubbing up against a bolt on the back of this later part of the installation. So what we've decided to do is we've loosened up the radiator here just a little bit so we can lift that just a fuzz. That's going to give us enough room. We're going to use a grinding wheel to come back in here and to take a little bit of the outside of this bolt off that's going to be necessary for the later part of the installation. Shouldn't affect anything. The threads are going to be fine. We're just going to take the corner off. Okay, at this point we have got the winch mounted right where we want it. We did have to make some modifications. We've loosened up the cooler and snugged it up. We've loosened the bolts, lifted it up a little bit, and retightened them. That did give us a fraction of an inch above the winch. We did enlarge the holes, the mounting holes at the bottom, which allowed us to move the winch this way just a fuzz. We trimmed down or ground down the bolts for these 2 holes in the back in order to make a little more room, and we just moved the winch a little bit. That's all it really took. And now we're going to remove the winch, reinstall the wires for the control box because we can't quite get to them now, and then we'll reinstall the winch.